Hello everybody. As we continue our exploration of Romantic aesthetics 1798 to 1832, we move on from poetry. We have looked at Wordsworth, Shelley and Blake to something else. I want to focus this session on something whose aesthetics intersects with that of the poets. So this session is devoted to visual arts and the English Romantics. We have already seen the influence of the visual arts on English Romanticism. We have seen theories via Burke and others, translations of Longinus, theories that discuss the aesthetics of the picturesque, the beautiful, and the sublime. Just a quick recap, the picturesque is organized land, quiet, systematic, with some ruins here and there, some melancholy, some poverty, but it's harmonious variety. The beautiful is quieter, it's passive. The sublime is terror-inducing, it's large, vast, incomprehensible. Influenced both the poetry and the visual arts, these theories were primarily coming out from philosophical texts. So philosophical texts influenced image making, poetry, and literary criticism and literary theories of such as they were during that time. Earlier painters and artists such as Claude Lorrain, a French painter, 1600 to 1682, and William Blake, whom we just looked at in an earlier session, were also key figures in English Romantic poetry and painting. Perhaps, arguably, the most influential genre in paintings was the landscape form. You had John Constable, Richard Wilson, J.M.W. Turner, Thomas Gainsborough, and some of these have already figured in our previous sessions as supplements to the poetic texts. We'll begin here with Claude Lorrain, Seaport at Sunset, 1639. And you will see specifically the use of light and shade in Claude Lorrain. And he became a specialist in this kind of depiction, a sun setting into the sea and the sun's distance and the sea's distance. And you'll see the more or less symmetrical arrangement here with the boats and the waters in the middle. The other one again, this time reversing the time of the day, Claude Lorrain, Sunrise, 1646-47 displayed. You will see the clarity of the blue up there in the sky and quieter landscapes, people relaxing. This is Claude Lorrain's famous Landscape with a Piping Shepherd, 1629 to 1632. Again, a quiet, idyllic setting. There is light, trees framing, human beings in the center. So if you go through the three slides that I have put up here for you, Claude Lorrain slides, Seaport at Sunset, Sunrise, and Landscape with a Piping Shepherd, you will see that Lorrain's use of light when painting and drawing the landscape is particularly significant. This was very influential in theories of the picturesque. William Gilpin called Lorrain the master actually in one of his texts. If you pay attention to this, it's luminous, but it's also backlit, like some of our electronic gadgets now. You can see light in the background. And if you look at the three paintings here, all three, Sunset, Sunrise, and Piping Shepherd, have darker foregrounds and brightness in the back of the painting. Luminous, backlit, shaded landscapes, characteristic of Claude Lorrain. They highlighted mostly quiet rural lands. They were poetic compositions for many romantics, and they were all influenced by Lorrain. Even the landscape design, mostly of gardens, was influenced by his paintings. So the point I'm trying to make here is, it's not only that Lorrain inspired poetry and other painters. Lorrain also inspired landscape designers. So they were also influenced by his paintings. The other one is John Constable, 1776 to 1837. A very influential man, also because of theories of paintings that he articulated. And much of what John Constable said about paintings was circulated among other artists and poets, and were influential in forming theories about, say, detail or the larger picture and things like that. And there was a constant debate between Constable and others as to whether we should focus on the details or we should have a focus which is much larger. Constable, like Lorrain, focused on light and atmospheric effects in his paintings. And again, Constable is focusing on rural England. So you'll have clouds, sunlight, shadows, trees, and the poor. He painted mills, rural labor, markets, and roads. We'll look at a couple of images from John Constable. Coming up next on your screen, one of Constable's famous ones, Dedham Vale, dated 1828. The landscape is clearly rural. There's a little bit of uncultivated land here and what we would think of as jungle or unruly landscape. Mostly, Constable paints landscapes of amenity, traditionally called the locus ammonis. Ammonis is the root of the word amenity, a landscape which provides basic requirements for human sustenance. They are serene landscapes. They suggest contemplative states of mind. Some of you may recall what you said about Mont Blanc, that the mind, looking at the vast mountains, is inspired because the mind is also taking on the characteristics of the sublime. In Constable, a similar effect, that the serene landscapes engender the reflective or the contemplative state of mind. Perhaps the next two coming up on your screens are Constable's most famous paintings. John Constable here, Ivanhoe Park, dated to 1816. And you can very clearly see a picturesque. There's water, land, some cattle. In the distance is a horizon with some trees and a fence. Now, if you look at Ivanhoe Park, what is it you notice? You notice it's a serene landscape. There's a reflection in the water. It's uneven. So you have harmony across various elements. This is a landscape that brings various elements together. And that harmony of the variety is central to how we imagine a landscape. So Constable is emphasizing a landscape which reflects the human mind. What ought the human mind to do? It should harmonize variety. Next one, John Constable, The Cornfield, 1826. Yet again, animals, skies, and please note the distribution of light. Now, critics have argued that Constable symbolizes time via landscape in the cornfield. For example, commentators note that the reaper looking backward at the boy, and this is your the cornfield, the reaper looking backward at the boy drinking from the stream is in fact looking at a former stage in his own life. And Gillian Darcy Wood, who has made this argument, says it's a Wordsworthian moment. So the man is looking backward, but he's not really looking at the boy. He is looking at how he was as a boy. So it's actually the man turning to look at his childhood. So the childhood is a shift in time because he's looking backwards in time, and the boy represents his earlier stage. Perhaps John Constable's most visible, most anthologized, most exhibited painting, The Hay Wain. Rural England, a cart, quiet landscape, and note again the color of the sky and the clouds. So clearly, Constable's landscapes are instances of the picturesque. I now move on to John Mallard William Taylor, J.M.W. Turner, 1775 to 1851. He did watercolors, prints, and oil paintings. Some of his most famous works, and these are now legendary, are Snowstorm, Hannibal Crossing the Alps, Rain, Steam, and Speed, The Great Western Railway, The Burning of the Houses of Lords and Commons, 1835. We'll first look at Turner, Rain, Steam, and Speed, The Great Western Railway. Notice here the background out of which the train seems to be coming towards us. The thing you see on your right is actually the engine heading towards you, dated 1844. The train just seems to burst out of the canvas. And if you look carefully out of it, you do not see the remaining section of the train. So the canvas on this side, on what would be the left of the screen, is smudged, covered, and something is coming out of it. It's the suddenness, and as you can see, there's a little bridge on the left, and there's a hound. But what is important here is the train just bursts out of the canvas. It has its own illumination, and it seems to sit oddly with the setting. The engine and the train is the only identifiable element in the composition. Everything else is blurred. There's a bridge, a hair on the other. So nature and culture are in the same frame. The point I'm making here is Turner seems to merge bits of the picturesque and bits of the sublime here. The turbulence on one side and the engine coming out from here. And the engine represents industry, industrialization, culture, modernity, basically human culture. And that bridge on the other are both instances of this. In the middle is the hair. So you have the hair, the bridge, and technology all in the same plane, roughly speaking. And it's the suddenness of it that should allow us to see the merger of the picturesque and the sublime. This is a classic sublime painting. Turner's Snowstorm, Hannibal crossing the Alps, dated to 1812. And you can see the legendary story of Hannibal crossing the Alps with his animals and his troops. How the hell did they actually cross over from the top of the mountain down to invade the countries below is source of considerable historical interest and curiosity. But what Turner is showing here is humanity is tiny, is small, nature is huge. What you're looking at is nature that is simply overwhelming. But the fact that Hannibal moved through the Alps, if you know the history of it, tells you that the painting is doing something else. It is overwhelming nature, it is sublime nature, but man triumphs. And you'll recall what we said early in another session, that the sublime is an aesthetics which is primarily masculine. And that's the politics of it. It's a patriarchal, gender-driven aesthetics because it is meant to show the heroic nature of man as in gendered. So it's nature meant to be sublime, which has to be conquered. And conquest is a masculine ethos. Next on your screen, Turner's Snowstorm, Steamboat of a Harbor's Mouth, 1842. The image here is of something being tossed and captured, and here is human culture embodied in the ship, tossed this way, that way, and nature's sublimity overwhelms everything else. Turner's images of storms at sea, the Parliament buildings on fire, and Hannibal's crossings of the Alps are examples of the romantic sublime, vast, incomprehensible. But I want to take a look now at one picturesque instance out of Turner. This is Tintern Abbey, the crossing and the chancel, looking towards the east window, dated 1794. Quiet, and you might find it beneficial and profitable, not to say interesting, to situate Wordsworth writing on Tintern Abbey and Turner's depiction of Tintern Abbey. As you can see, the abbey is more or less in ruins. And we do know that the picturesque did ask for some ruins to be installed, as in the landscape. And the paintings invariably captured poverty and ruins and hovels and cottages. Here you can see that the visitors passing through Tintern Abbey, it's ivy covered, it's a ruin effectively, but it's quieter. There's nothing disturbing about it except the melancholy around a ruin. I want to conclude with a specific image. Henry Fuseli, The Nightmare, 1781. There's a gargoyle-like figure sitting on top of a woman who's asleep or drunk or stoned or whatever you want to call it. And there's a hideous horse head in a corner. There's a table with some things on it, either substances she took. But Henry Fuseli is The Nightmare, not strictly speaking within the ambit of what we have been discussing so far by way of aesthetics, is the source of much Gothic traditions. The nightmare with the animals, with the gargoyles, with people argue a demon, is the other side of romanticism, the darkness, the anxiety. But it also implies or suggests, symbolizes the nightmares people have. So the gargoyle is not sitting out there, the horse is not out there. The gargoyle sitting on top of the woman's stomach might actually be something she's imagining. The Gothic, as we know, explored the darker side of the human mind. Thomas de Quincey's The Confessions of an English Opium Eater with the nightmare sequences, and several of the Gothic novels, The Castle of Otranto, the writings of Clara Reeve, Maria Edgeworth, we have Anne Radcliffe, Matthew Lewis's The Monk, all texts that spoke about nightmares, disease, decay, madness. So Henry Fuseli's The Nightmare and several other texts that he did, I put in here to show you the contrast between the sublime of nature, the picturesque in cultivated landscapes and nature, and here the Gothic. The Gothic is the counterpart to the aesthetics of beauty. It's the counterpart to the picturesque. Thank you.